Welcome to Up My Hockey with Jason Podolin, where we deconstruct the NHL journey, discuss what it takes to make it, and have a few laughs along the way. I'm your host, Jason Podolin, a 31st overall draft pick who played 41 NHL games, but thought he was destined for 1,000. Learn from my story and those of my guests. This is a hockey podcast about reaching your potential. Hello there, and welcome back to Up My Hockey for episode 17. And today, if you are new to the program, we have a very special guest on by the name of Ken Holland. And if you are listening to this program, you know that Ken Holland needs absolutely no introduction, but I will do my best to do so. Ken is the second longest tenured GM in the NHL right now. David Poile of the Nashville Predators was hired, I believe, 7 days before him, back in 1997. Making Mr. Poile and Mr. Holland in the driver's seat as the GM of an organization for the past 23 years. Ken is regarded by many to be potentially one of the greatest GMs of all time, with his 4 Stanley Cups with the Detroit Red Wings, and also 2 other Stanley Cup Finals appearances where they didn't come away with the hardware. Ken was steering the boat of the Detroit Red Wings machine there throughout the 90s and early 2000s when they were dominant and having 100-point season after 100-point season. He was part of drafting the likes of Datsuk and Zetterberg and bringing Lidstrom in and having Osgood there and a lot of these players that were identified in later rounds that turned out to be absolutely superstar players at the NHL level. He is now obviously the GM of the Edmonton Oilers and has made some great moves within that franchise, and they're sitting in a position to be in the Stanley Cup playoffs if they were to start today. And it's going to be exciting to see what is happening there for the Edmonton Oilers in the future with Ken and his new coach, Dave Tippett, at the helm. So today we talk about mostly player development, because that's what this show is about, how to become a pro, what it takes to be a pro, how they go about it in Edmonton, and Ken's philosophy for the draft and player development, what it's like to be in the minors and the call-ups and all of that kind of stuff. So he was kind enough to spend over an hour here with us today, and that's just a testament to Ken and his character and how approachable he is and how willing he is to offer up value from his experiences and from his long time involved in hockey, one as a player and then also in the front office. So without further ado, I am very, very happy to bring you my interview with Ken Holland. All right. Well, welcome to Up My Hockey, Mr. Ken Holland. I really appreciate being here today.
Nice to be with you, Jason.
Awesome. Had a few issues there getting on, but in this whole COVID-19, we have to figure out how to do more things over a computer, don't we?
Yeah, I'm getting more tech savvy by the week.
I know, kidding. Which actually is an interesting place to start. I mean, I think I'd be doing this episode a disservice if I didn't touch on it. I mean, COVID-19 is it's affecting everything, let alone the league. How do you see this thing panning out here? Do you see the season being finished at some point?
Well, I think that's, obviously that's the hope from everybody that's involved. We want to try to keep our business going or get it back up and running after the pause and declare a Stanley Cup champion. Obviously with government officials and health officials signing off. So, that's the hope, certainly. And being a general manager, we played 71 games of our 82 game schedule. We were in a position where we were at big games down the stretch in the regular season to try to qualify for the playoffs. And we certainly would like to see what we're able to accomplish in the 1920 season. Can we play our way into the playoffs, and what kind of noise can we make once we get in? So hopefully they find a solution that we get back up and running. I see that baseball is, following on TSN, you're following these other sports, and certainly there's lots of talk about the possibility of maybe baseball coming back, and obviously there's the NHL and the NBA. So hopefully there's a solution that we get to finish the season.
Do you think that there has to be a conclusion to the season, like in order to do it fairly and get people into the playoffs, or could there be just an arbitrary decision by somebody at the top saying, well, no, this is the way we're doing it?
Well, I think ultimately it's, it's going to be obviously Gary Bettman and Bill Daly, obviously with the blessing of the Board of Governors, working with Don Fear, Matthew Schneider, and the Players Association, and they put together I think a 5 or 6 player committee, the resumption of play committee. Connor McDavid, an Oiler player, is on that committee, and obviously they're working together to find along with health officials, along with government officials, to find a solution that works for everybody.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you guys are comfortable. Well, I shouldn't say comfortably. I mean, every point's so hard to get in the NHL, but you had 4 points on Calgary when this thing was done. And all these teams are making a noise, right? Or trying to get in, like you say. So, I mean, it's kind of disheartening for a team like the Rangers. I mean, there's a lot of teams there that were really coming on late, and then they're out of the playoff picture right now. And if they were to say, oh, well, we're going to start with who we got, I mean, that's kind of unfortunate too. But I mean, the whole thing is unfortunate. So I guess no matter what it is, there's probably no perfect scenario at this point. Moving on within that context, like how does this impact the draft in your opinion? And how does that all fall out?
Well, we'll be ready whenever the draft is going to be. Obviously there's talk of an early June draft, and if not an early June draft, then I'm not sure when the draft is going to take place. But Tyler Wright's our chief scout, chief head of amateur scouting. Last week he had some Zoom calls, conference meetings with his staff. I know that there's more planned for this week. As we get into further into May, I know that Tyler and his scouts are going to do some Zoom calls with prospects. With no combine this year, that's how all the NHL teams will do their interview process through computers. So, but when the draft is coming, I expect that we will be ready to go as ready as we can be. Given, certainly there was. The World Under 18, which was supposed to be this year in Plymouth, it's always mid to late April. This year was supposed to be in Plymouth, Michigan, is an important scouting tool for everybody. But where everybody's on a level playing field, we had our scouts out and about all year, and we've gathered our information, and now we'll go about the process of putting our final list together and be ready for the draft. We will be ready to go whenever the draft is.
Right. Now you mentioned it. I mean, it is the same playing field for everyone. I mean, if it's not the normal scenario, you didn't get a chance to get that second or third look at these guys that you might have wanted to, but I guess it's the same for everybody. This is your second draft with Edmonton, correct? Because you were hired before the draft last year.
Yes.
Was Tyler already a part of the team at that point?
No, Tyler, I'd hired Tyler in Detroit, 7-8 years ago. Tyler finished out, he was the chief scout and ran the draft for the Detroit Red Wings at last year's draft. And then shortly after the draft, Tyler met with Steve Yzerman, and they both agreed to go in separate directions. Steve wanted to put his own staff together, and he's hired Chris Draper as his chief scout in Detroit. And Tyler and I obviously have a relationship working together in Detroit, and I brought Tyler on board. Kept most of the scouts in Edmonton. Bob Green was the chief scout in Edmonton for last year's draft. Bob basically is now the number 2 man. Tyler's come in and is going to run the amateur draft, and Bob Green's going to be his right-hand man.
Awesome. How does that work now? So, I mean, like you said, you kept on most of the scouts. Do you bring in your own philosophy then into Edmonton? I mean, along with Tyler, obviously you guys worked together for a while about your approach to the draft, or is there a philosophy to the draft for you?
Yeah, I think there's a philosophy, to pretty well everything running an NHL team. And, within that philosophy, you got to be able to go in a lot of different directions, because we're dealing with people, and some things you do work and some things don't work as the way you'd like it to do. But certainly when it comes to the draft, that's one of the reasons I brought Tyler right in to run the director of amateur scouting for the Oilers. I'd worked with him in Detroit, and I brought in Archie Henderson to be the director of pro scouting for the Edmonton Oilers. I'd worked with Archie in in Detroit as well. So, they understand the way I think, my philosophy in running a hockey team. And, we've got relationships that have built up over time. And certainly there's lots of really good hockey people here in Edmonton. I just have to build relationships with them. And relationships take time. So that's why it's important for me to bring in some people that I've had those relationships, that know how I think, I know how they think, and what we're trying to build, and how we see a team, the building of a team. So certainly philosophy is a big part of running an NHL.
In your mind, is it always the best player available when you're looking at the draft? Meaning, like, just the highest, the highest ceiling that you see there. Are you actively trying to look 3-4 years down the road and see a spot that maybe you're trying to fill, or a depth position that you need more help with?
Well, I think it's the player with the highest ceiling, but I also think in Edmonton, for example, last year we took Philip Broberg, pick 7, I think, or 8. We had the 8th pick in the draft.
8, yeah.
The year before, they had the 10th pick in the draft. We took Evan Bouchard. And, if you look at the defense in Edmonton, for the most part, it's relatively young. Clefbaum's is mid-20s, Nurse mid-20s, Larson's upper 20s, and Ethan Bear's 22. So certainly defense is I would say the strength of the Edmonton Oilers organization. So you're going to rank your players. I think ideally we'd like to probably draft a forward and not a defenseman. But if you get to if there's a defenseman there that we rate really highly, and he slips and he's there when we pick right now, based upon percentages, points, and everything, we've got the 20th pick in the draft. We'll pick a defenseman, and then if you can develop, and we'll work. And then from a player development standpoint, if you can develop all these players into NHL players, certainly there's also an opportunity down the road for everybody's always looking for a defenseman. So I think for the most part, you take best player available, but past decisions that you've made have to weigh in a little bit. So you can't just load up on constant left wingers. You can't just keep drafting left wingers. You got to get, you need centermen and right wingers and defensemen and goaltenders. So some of your past decisions weigh in a little bit. But for the most part, you're going to draft a player that you think has got the highest ceiling.
Awesome. Just for the people listening, and I guess even for myself, I don't know exactly. You're the GM. I mean, you have your say in everything that goes on there. How much do you actually watch these prospects prior to getting picked? And are you the one that says in the 5th round, yeah, we want this guy? Or is that left to that relationship that you're talking about with these people that you've built this with, and that's kind of Tyler's call at that point?
The later rounds for sure are your area, your scouts, and for the most part, your area scouts. I would say to you that probably the first pick for most organizations is the chief scout and the general manager, and it may be 2 or 3, whoever, 1 or 2 director of player personnel, but it's a small group of people after gathering all the information from your scouts. And then as you get into the 2nd round, it starts to expand. As you start to get into the 4th and 5th and deeper in the draft, that's when you're really counting on your area people, because your chief scout is probably concentrating on the top 3 rounds. In terms of player, but as he's going about the business of watching all those players, he's seeing other players that are on the board, but he's seeing them once or twice. So you're really counting on an area person at some point in time in the draft to really push hard to draft somebody, and you hopefully, obviously, that later round pick. One of the successes to building a good team through the draft is finding players deeper in the draft. I mean, the focus always is on the high players, or the high picks. Whether it's the media or the team. But certainly, I reflect back on my days in Detroit. I was in Detroit for 36 years and 22 as a general manager, and you think Pavel Datsyuk in the 6th round and Zetterberg in the 7th round, or vice versa. The reality is those 2 players were top 5 picks. If they go back in the draft, they're top 5 picks. So the Detroit Red Wings got 2 players that were top 5, top 10 picks for sure, in the 6th round and the 7th round. So when you're drafting and you're trying to predict the future of 18-year-old players, It's not an exact science. It's not an exact science. Some people, some young players, they grow big and they fill out earlier. Other people are small and they have a growth surge when they're 18 and 19, 17, 18 and 19. We do all our interviews and try to find out what's inside that athlete in terms of motivation, and you do the best that you can, but they're young people. I was a parent. My wife and I had 4 kids, 2 boys and 2 girls, and they're all between 30 and 38 now, and they were in our basement. And you're never 100% sure how they're going to hang out, how they're going to turn out, because they've also got their peer group that they're hanging out with, and those people are important in their lives. And as a scout, you're sitting up in row 36 in Moose Jaw and Chicoutimi and in Sweden and Russia and in Medicine Hat, and then through an interview process, we're trying to predict the future. So certainly the number one thing is skill. Number one thing we're looking for is skill. But just as important is determination and drive and passion, and those things that push an individual as they start to meet barriers or hurdles in whatever industry they take, they decide. Certainly, those are key ingredients in the player development side. So we're drafting skill, we're drafting potential, we're drafting ceiling. But once you get those players, certainly an important part is player development and the internal, what's driving, what's the motivation. Get up early in the morning, go to the gym, make sacrifices, personal sacrifices. Those are all important ingredients in fulfilling potential.
Yeah, no, 100%. I couldn't agree more. And I'm glad you brought it up. I was going to ask you, it seems like there's more and more science around the mindset of the athlete. And, like you said, skill is one thing, but what drives them is completely another. And I was wondering how you guys go about, one, trying to identify that. Is that a questionnaire scenario? Is that a interaction with the player? Is it a talk with the coach? Or like, how deep do you guys go, maybe especially with those first few round selections that are so pivotal to an organization?
It's harder. Certainly that's where I get back to, Jason, deeper in the draft. That's so if you're drafting somebody in Western Canada, whether it's tier 2 or major junior, and you're in the 6th and 7th round, you're really counting on your area people to talk to. They've built as a scout, the scouts have built relationships with coaches, and not only the coach of that team, but other coaches and minor hockey people that have known those young players growing up, and they'll take all teams will take out these young players, for something to eat, to bite to eat, an interview process over the course of the season. Then you have the NHL, combine, and they fill out questionnaires. And we try to do, we do as much research we can on the background of the player. And again, you gather as much information as you can, and then you rank them, you make your decisions. And that's where I also believe, and I think 30 other teams believe the same thing, the importance of player development. Once we make a decision and we select somebody, then we as an organization need to do everything we can to give them guidance, education, to help them, how to eat, what to eat, nutrition, a nutrition person, a strength person, whatever they need to try to help them get better.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems more pivotal than ever in today's game that you need to develop your prospects, just because of the way the salary cap system works. And if you can't have somebody that you've drafted come up and fill those spots on an entry-level deal, you're in trouble, right? Whereas in years past, you could go to the free agent market and just sign away. But so that, to me, that development seems critical. And then you had a couple this year, in my opinion, like a 5th rounder with Ethan Bear that I saw play at the beginning of the year, and I was like, wow, this guy's pretty special, actually. I thought he was doing really well. And then you had like a Yamamoto come up again to fill a spot and play big minutes. Without those guys, Edmonton might look a little different this year. Do you agree with that?
Oh, totally agree with it. I think you've nailed it right on. Is certainly the teams that are good over a period of time, they draft and they develop. You need lots of homegrown players. that turn out to be, top 9 forwards, top 5 defensemen, and number 1 goalies, because you can't just go out on the open market and when they're in a cap world and sign all those players. And number 2, those players, many of those players, they're not on the open market. Those teams that draft those players sign them up to long-term deals and keep them, because we all understand how important those players, those are to the long-term success of your team. So, and then it's not only drafting players that, as you said, are going to push through the system and end up to be important pieces on your team, but along the way they play on your team cheap. They're on entry-level contracts, or maybe they use their entry-level contract to spend their time in the American League, and then they spend a couple of years on a second deal that's relatively cheap as they are along the process to becoming, like I said, top 9 forwards and top 5 defensemen. So, you can't carry 20 players that are making, with an $80 million salary cap, you can't have 20 players that make $4 to $8 million. You're going to be way over. So you probably, if you look, half the team, about 10 players thereabouts can make a 65, 70% of the cap, and then the other 10, 11, 12 players have to make 1/3 of the cap. So, in that portion, you talked about, certainly Ethan Bear on an entry-level contract, Yamamoto on an entry-level contract. Caleb Jones came up this year and did a good job. And in February, Clefbaum went down for 9 or 10 games, and Caleb Jones stepped in on defense and played 20 minutes a night until Clef came back. And those 3 young players really played an important part of giving us depth and giving us good players, and also hope that how good can they be down the road. So certainly the draft and developing is critical to being a successful franchise.
You mentioned looking for skill, and I'm not saying that some of these old school guys that I'm going to classify as like a Cassian it doesn't have skill, but it seems to me, just watching the game, that there's starting to be a little bit more of an equilibrium back with seeing the benefit of physicality and a little bit of tenacity and some toughness. Whereas I didn't see that, say, 2, 3, 4 years ago. It seemed a little bit softer. To me, like a guy like Zach Cassian, who can play the game, and who offers that element of grit and a little bit of fear for the other team. I think those guys are going to become really valuable again, if they're not already considered super valuable. Do you now start to identify that in the draft as somebody that could fill that role as well, which maybe their skill level, like I said, isn't quite as high, but maybe they bring that different element?
I think you're absolutely right on. I think that there's been such a focus on skill, and not only at the NHL level, I think, but at minor hockey and player development and, one-on-one and skill camps and skill development, that certainly I think what you're talking about is the element of grit, those battles that need to be won in the hard areas, what we call the hard areas in front of the net. Whether you're defending or you're trying to get a position as a forward to get that rebound or screen the goalie. Those puck battles in the corner, those puck battles on the wall to keep the puck in or to get the puck out. Oh, it's analytics. If you win more puck battles, you're going to win over the course of a game, and then over the course of 82 games are going to be part of the process of having a successful team. And that's so certainly you need skill, but I think what you're talking, in order to build a team, you need lots of different elements. Certainly you need skill, but you also need people that can check and block shots and win draws and penalty kill and find a way to check and checking just doesn't mean flipping the puck in. I think it's the ability to puck possession and make it difficult for the other team's skill players to get the puck, that they've got to spend energy to get the puck off you. But certainly a guy like Zach Cassian we just signed him to a 4-year contract extension. I think it was about November or December, and he brings those elements you talk about. He gives our team a physical presence. He's got skill. He's on pace for scoring about 15 goals. And I think those type of players, as you get into playoff series, they become even more valuable. Over, you start to get into a 7-game series and you start to play the same team every night, every second night for 2 weeks, and it builds up a little animosity. And certainly a part of being a successful team is being a hard team to play against.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think that would be a little bit of a teeter-totter act, I would imagine, as a general manager, to have a team that is going to be successful in the regular season and successful enough to get you to the dance. Where the regular season, we all know, we all watch the same games. It's not as physical as it is in the playoffs. I mean, it's not as hard to play. And then all of a sudden you get in the playoffs, and if you're too small, if you're too skilled, if you're too light, you're probably not sticking around very long. But if you have too many Zach Kassians during the regular season, you're probably not making the playoffs. So I imagine that's a pretty delicate balance to try and find.
Well, that's team building. That's trying to figure out exactly, what the makeup, and even within a line, obviously you need some people that are going to go to the corner and win puck battles, and offense, and then you need, the playmaking, and then you need the scores. Hang on, Jason, 1 sec.
No worries.
My dog wanted out. But I think, I think that, it's the team building. Obviously, you need a lot of, to your point, the regular season is played a certain style, and it's a little bit of a different style come playoff time. And I think, you need to have different types of ingredients on a team. The team that wins the Stanley Cup, the team that can make the playoffs over 82 games and be in the top 16 teams, and you're, in the top half. There's 31 teams, and a year from now there'll be 32 with Seattle. So over 82 games, half the league doesn't qualify. But and then you get into 4 best-of-7 series, and now it's 2 months of every second night going head-to-head against a team for 2 weeks and another 2 weeks. That team that wins the Stanley Cup probably has all those ingredients. They've got some skill, they've got some depth, they've got toughness. They've got goaltending. They've got the defenseman that can run a power play. The defenseman that can kill penalties. Because as you start to go over 82 games, you separate, and then you go from 16 to 8 to 4 to 2 teams, and then the one team wins the Stanley Cup final. They're the team that has they've been tested over the course of 8 and 9 months, and they're the last team standing. They've answered the most questions in an NHL test over the course of a 6 month, 6.5 month regular season and a 2-month playoff.
Yeah, it's a grind, and you'd know better than anybody else with your history there. When you consider player development, I just remember back when I was playing, which is now, 15 years ago, or probably 20 years ago, last time I was in an NHL organization. And player development has definitely changed in the perspective on the players and the minors. And now there's people dedicated, like you said, there's so many more resources there. And I think it's as we already talked about, it's a necessity. I mean, we have to have those developmental aspects to the game. Who do you have now as director of player development? And a lot of teams, and I believe you're one of them, that's bringing in some players that used to play to help these guys kind of transition into becoming pros.
Well, our director of player development was Scott Housen. I mean, we just lost him here in the last couple of months to become the president of the American Hockey League. So Scott played the game. He played professional hockey. He became a lawyer, became an NHL general manager in Columbus. He's been an NHL assistant general manager in the last few years. He's been the director of player development and overseen the development of the prospects in Edmonton. So he's a huge loss, and he's going to be, it's a huge hole to fill. Obviously, at the same time, I think he accepted the job in about mid to late February, and he took the job on May 1st. Well, shortly, within a month, obviously there was an NHL pause due to the pandemic, so I haven't filled the hole right now. Obviously, it's not a time really to be going out and signing people. Got to see we got to get the game back up and running. So we'll do it internally for a while here. That's one of the things I want to talk to. I got my assistant general manager, Keith Gretzky, and I will probably handle, but certainly, most NHL teams now have for sure one and some 2 and 3 people on staff that are, directors of player development. You got to communicate with those players all year. Every NHL team has a summer under the CBA. You get 1 week in the summer where you get development camp. It's always after the draft, late June or early July. Once the draft is over, you'll bring in those players that you drafted from that draft and maybe the last couple of drafts. You'll have a camp. You'll educate them on nutrition, on strength. Get to see your facilities, on ice practice. Meet your coaching staff. Then we have other little things for them to team building and other things to them, how to deal with the media, and things that are as you're going from college, junior, and European hockey, eventually over the next couple of years to professional hockey. So stepping stone for them to understanding what pro hockey is all about. So I do need to replace Scott Howson, and will do once we get back up and running.
You mentioned that that you're staying in contact with your players from the prospect side, and I'm sure now from an NHL side. Like, what are those conversations like right now, and what is the expectations for guys, whether they're Oilers presently, or whether they're Bakersfield Condors presently, or whether they're just junior guys that you want to make sure are taking care of some business?
Well, Keith Gretzky talked to all the Bakersfield Condors there. Obviously, the American League just announced that their season is being canceled. They just announced it a couple of days ago. I know that Keith, as the general manager of Bakersfield, he had his exit meetings over the computer with all our players over the last couple of weeks. In exit meetings, veteran players, you try to use it as an opportunity to kind of get a veteran player's perspective as to what the organization is doing good and what you can do better. And then with younger players, it's an opportunity to the off season for young players is a critical time in their player development, because there's no practices. They've got for the most part June, July, and August. There's 3 months there where they can hit the gym on an everyday basis, be in a group, work with a strength coach, and get physically stronger, more power in their legs, or stronger upper body, so that when you get into those one-on-one battles, you can win more of those physical battles. So and then obviously at the NHL level, we're still hoping to get back here and running at some point in time. With our young players, Scott Howson had been in contact with them on a regular basis. He just left us on May the 1st, and I know over the last couple of weeks of April, he talked to all our players. So here in the next week or so, I need to reach out to all the players and have a conversation with them, because obviously right now there's nobody in Edmonton that they had built. Those young players have built a relationship up with Scott Howson. So while we don't have somebody in place, it'll be up to Keith Gretzky and myself to stay in contact with them.
One of the things that I've talked about on this podcast before, but was my experience in Detroit when I came to camp the 1 year there. I don't even know if you remember, but I was invited to camp there at the end kind of my career. I wanted another shot, and I had an experience with Babcock and Junior, and obviously knew you a little bit personally. And my experience there at Red Wings camp was amazing, because it was the fifth team that I'd been to camp with at that point, and it felt like none other that I'd been a part of to that point, and it really started with what I felt was the players. I mean, guys like Chris Chelios and Lidstrom and Hasek at the time was there, and Holmstrom, and these guys just made you feel really included, like you were a part of things and part of the system, and I think that was a testament to the success you guys had there in Detroit. I mean, obviously you're trying to consciously make that happen, have that culture there, that these young guys step in and feel like they belong and what have you. But it seemed to me like it was a people thing. Like, how do you develop your people to become better players? And that's the way it felt to me when I was there in Detroit.
Well, I think you've hit it right on. I mean, you've talked about the word culture, and I think culture is people. It's not something you go to a store and buy, or it's culture is the people. It's the people in on the ice. You're people that wear the letters, the players that play the most, play in the most important situations, and certainly their commitment to the team, their commitment to their teammates, to the organization, to the team. And I think that, I think back to the early 90s and when Scotty Bowman came to Detroit, and we had lots of talent, but we were trying to figure out a way to turn that regular season success into playoff success. And Jim Devellano at the time went out and had a relationship with Scotty Bowman and brought Scotty in, and he became the coach. And then Scotty demanded that our best players sacrifice points, sacrifice ice time, play a little less ice time, chip the puck out, chip the puck in, do the things that need to do. And certainly Steve Yzerman was one of the players. There was a time in the late 80s, early 90s, the three best offensive players in the game were, was Gretzky, Lemieux, and I think Steve had 155 and 160 points a couple of years. And then Steve made a decision in the early 90s that he was going to make all those sacrifices. And when you, as a player, see your captain and one of your leaders make a decision to play the game a little bit differently, and shorten your shifts, chip the puck in, chip the puck out, get less points, but ultimately all the things that help your team win, that starts to set the culture. So I would say to you, Scotty Bowman, and Jim Devellano came to Detroit when the Ilitches bought the team in 1982 or 83 as the general manager. And I remember I became a scout with the Red Wings in the 85-86 season. We had the number one pick in the draft. It took Joe Murphy. But for a period of time, what you're trying to get talent. We didn't have enough talent. So you're just working on trying to get talent. And then there's stages of building an organization. You got to get talent. And after you get talent, you've got to and you want to win regular season games. And then you're trying to put the pieces together, and all those disappointments and trial and error lead to decisions through the hockey club. And I would say to you, so through the late 80s and early 90s, we were getting talent. And then by the 93, 94, there was an Yzerman and a Fedorov and a Konstantinov and a Lidstrom in the organization. And then Scotty made some trades to bring in Brendan Shanahan and do some other things. But certainly Scotty Bowman, Steve Yzerman, and the top players, we had many playoff disappointments, losing in the first round to Toronto in Game 7 to overtime goal by Nikolai Borshevsky, and getting upset by San Jose Sharks, who had finished 36 points behind us, or 30 points plus in the regular season. And all those disappointments were motivation for all of us to try to figure out ways to be different, to be better. So when you came in to training camp there in the early 2000s, and Dominic Hasek, we acquired Dominic Hasek in 2001. We won the Cup in 97, 98. We had now started to figure out how to win in the regular season, and how to win in the playoffs. And what you talked about is the cult, and then it's the Yzermans and the Lidstroms and the Shanahans and the Larionovs, those veteran, the Hasheks. Hashek became a partner with Chris Osgood, and Chris Osgood on the ice every day with Dominic Hasek, and Igor Larionov sitting on the bus with Pavel Datsyuk when Igor's 40 years old and Pavel's 22. And when we had drafted Henrik Zetterberg, and we brought him over, he played in Europe that year. We brought him over to the playoffs to watch the Colorado-Detroit playoff series, I think the first 2 or 3 games. And then I met with Henrik, and he told me his favorite player was Steve Yzerman. And then a year later, Zetterberg is on the team with Steve Yzerman, who's near 2 years later, 3 years later, Steve retires. But it was the passing of the torch. So the Haseks and the Lidstroms and the Chelioses, they passed the torch on to the Cronwalls and the Zetterbergs and the Hoodlers and the Filplas and the Datsyuks and the Fransons. And, we were able to keep it going for probably, you know, we had a generation of players and they retired, but they passed it on to another generation, Zetterberg, Datsuk, Cronwell. But ultimately, Detroit now is in a rebuild mode, and you can only go so long. The system is designed for parity. So, but you were talking about a time in Detroit's history when, you know, we had a lot of great superstar players that were in the prime of their careers, and they realized that, you know, Brett Hull came to Detroit when he was, I don't know, 35 years old or something, and it was an opportunity to play with other good players to try to ultimately do what every athlete wants to do in the NHL is be part of the Stanley Cup championship team. There's no better feeling than being part of a team that has won the Stanley Cup.
Just want to take a short break to say thank you for listening, and also to make a request that you guys share or like or review the episode. That is the one way you can support me and what we're trying to do here at Up My Hockey, is by sharing the grassroots level of what it's like to become a player, to earn a professional contract, you know, to do what it takes to be the best player that you can be. And by having conversations with some really great people within the industry, like Mr. Holland, that hopefully you guys are gaining value from their experience and from the questions that I'm asking. So take the time right now, press pause, and see if you can review or see if you can like or share the episode. Please, that's the best way to grow this. And I appreciate all you who are listening. Thank you. No, 100%. I mean, what keeps ringing to me as you're speaking there is like the idea. I mean, even what you said at the end, everybody wants to win, right? I mean, especially at the professional level, but are you prepared to do what it takes to win? And, you know, you mentioned about skill and you want talent, but like talent without character is a completely different scenario. And to find that fusion, right, of the guys that are really good and they're also really good people who are prepared to make those decisions that you mentioned, like the Steve Yzerman made. You mean, he grew into that, it sounds like, you know, he grew into that leadership aspect of what it takes to be a winner, because not everybody does pass the torch. You know what I mean? And we've been I've been in organizations where the best players were aloof and you could barely even see them or talk to them, right? They had no interest in developing some 21-year-old kid, right? But it seems like the organizations that are good have those types of people. I know Boston has done that too with Char and Bergeron and these guys that they actually almost get assigned a player that they're supposed to look after and take care of. And that inclusivity, I think, is well, I don't think. I mean, I know. I mean, it has to help, but that is something that is, you can't really mandate that as a general manager. You're supposed to do this, right? But you can help it to push it along. I mean, I think that's obviously something that maybe Dave must be looking at doing. I mean, Dave Tippett is part of one of the reasons why you signed him. But is that kind of like that personal development that is so critical, is it not?
Well, totally. And I think as you're talking, you know, also part of it is we all need experiences, and some, you know, you need adversity. You know, whatever industry you go in, it's just not smooth sailing. There's choppy waters, and it's how you handle those choppy waters. And sometimes, you know, I think about, you know, when Detroit won the Cup in '97 and hadn't won the Cup for 42 years, and I think about all the playoff, all the disappointments that we had. Sometimes those disappointments are part of the evolution of your team and the evolution of an individual player. And those disappointments, when you got to live them, they're no fun. But when you look back, you needed some of those disappointments to maybe adjust the way we played the game, or adjust the way we coached the game, or adjusted the way it was the manager. We had to make a couple of tweaks and move a couple of people in and a couple of people out and change it, or have the patience to let some of these young players go through the trial and error to live that adversity and understand that you're going to come out the other side and it's going to make you stronger. So that's, you know, and it certainly, as you go to Dave Tippett, certainly as I went into the process of trying to hire a coach for the Edmonton Oilers, when I was hired as the manager, I'd come into Edmonton. Obviously, it's a Canadian marketplace, and it's living in Medicine Hat, playing junior hockey in the mid '70s, and living in Medicine Hat from '85 to '95 as a scout for the Detroit Red Wings. Certainly understand the passion of the fan bases for the Calgary Flames and the Edmonton Oilers and the Canadian passionate fan bases, and it's been a tough go for the Oilers recently. I think making the playoffs one time in 11 or 12 years. So, I wanted to bring in a coach that, I think about my time as, when I became a general manager 20 years ago, and some of the decisions I made, I might make some of those early decisions a little bit differently today than I did back at the time. And that, I think that experience is important. So I wanted to hire a coach that wasn't learning on the fly, that had dealt with the adversity, understood the National Hockey League, the ups and downs, and certainly talked to a lot of people going through the process to hire Dave. And you look at his resume, he coached over 1,200 games. He played in the National Hockey League. He'd done a tremendous job in Dallas and a tremendous job in Arizona. So ultimately made the decision to hire Tip, and certainly he's been a big part of where we were after 71 games, legit, in a real legitimate competition to qualify for the playoffs. I thought he did a great job in communicating with all our players, with our top players, with our leadership group, of having our players understand how he, as a coach, wanted us to play to be successful, and how everybody they all had a piece of the, if it was the team pie, they all had a little piece of the pie of responsibility, and everybody felt that some people killed penalties, some people were on the power play. He tried to keep everybody engaged as having a piece of the responsibility of the success of our hockey team. So certainly Tip had done a great job, and I've enjoyed the process of building a relationship with Dave Tippett, because, as you had said here earlier, certainly one of the things that I believe the importance of is relationships. And when you came to camp in Detroit, one of the things, we used to go to Traverse City, Michigan. We won the cup. I became manager in 1997. We'd won the cup. I talked to Scotty Bowman about taking camp out of Detroit, and an opportunity for the players to get away for just 5 or 6 days and build relationships, and certainly on the ice, but go for dinners together. And when you're in your own city, when the on ice session is over, everybody goes home to their families or goes home to where they stay. And when you take them away, they bond and they build relationships. And I think the Traverse City, Michigan, the Detroit went to training camp there last year. So since 1997, Detroit has always opened training camps for, the first week has been a prospect tournament, the prospect stay, the veterans come in, and the veterans are there for 4 or 5 days, and you bond, you build relationships, you do your work, whether you go golfing or they go fishing a little bit, and they go for dinners, and they build relationships. And I think relationships are a big part of being successful in any industry.
Well, yeah, and Dave has, I know a lot of guys who played for him, and he definitely sounds like he takes care of people. He cares about the person behind the player, and he's a very good communicator. And I think that seems like the league is going that way for sure. That you need to have that respect on a personal level, not just on a hockey level. And Mr. Tippett has done a great job of earning that respect throughout the league. So yeah, I thought that was a really great choice by you. As you were talking about the evolution of a player, I was thinking, you see it time and time again. And I think Alex Ovechkin is a really good example of that, being, one of the best players of our generation, and had a hard time winning, and had those upsets and had the adversity and just couldn't get past the Penguins. And then the year they won, it really seemed like he played differently. Like, to me, I was watching a different player in the playoffs, and the things that he was doing, made his team better, not just Alex better. And then he ended up, winning it. And how long did it take him to kind of figure that out? So, I do think that as a fan, or, the people that are watching, there is a personal evolution that is happening along with this hockey player to become what it takes to win. And And I'm just going to piggyback with one thought. And I mean, I am a massive Leon Draisaitl fan, and I'm also a massive Connor McDavid fan. But I was watching one game this year, and I think you guys were up 3-0. It was like last minute and a half of the game, and Leon had the puck on the half wall, and he tried to make this cute play back to the point, and it got picked off, and it was a breakaway that they end up scoring on. So you guys still won the game. I think it was 3-1, and Koskinen lost a shutout, who was unbelievable that game. And I watched Leon in that play, and he didn't really back check that hard. It didn't really give Koskinen a pat in the pads, and he went to the bench, and it was kind of like ho hum. And I was wondering, I wonder if that's part of his evolution, like to show maybe that he cares. And I also wondered, like, how would Dave Tippett now, like a guy that's making $7 million a year, signed for this long, where's a letter? How do you handle somebody like that in this day and age, if he did feel that was something that he should talk to him about?
Well, I would say, first off, when you talked about Connor and Leon, in the short time that I've been around them, they both have unbelievable passion and determination for individual success and team success, and they want team success. And for me, I have to reflect back on my time in Detroit, because that's where I was for 64 years old. I was there for 36 years of my life, and 22 years, a third of my life was a manager, and over half my life I was part of the organization either as a minor league player, and the ups and the downs, and certainly the peaks and the valleys. But that's a part of the evolution, the growth of a player, the growth of a team, and the most important thing for me is determination. Once you get the players, we draft the talent. It's the determination and the drive and the passion to get better individually and collectively. And I see that out of Connor and Liam and lots of our other players. And that's the encouraging part for me, and I think for Dave Tippett as well, is that we have a group of athletes that they want team success. They want team success. But Jason, you don't just snap in. We don't snap our fingers or go to a store and we learn how to do everything right all the time. Even as a manager today, after being in a GM role for 23 and 24 years, I'm going to make decisions that aren't going to work out. You're signing players to contracts, and some are going to be good for the team, and some aren't going to be good for the team. But you hope that you make way more good decisions, because you're going to make some decisions that aren't just going to work out. We're people. We're human beings. We're not perfect. And I think that's part of understanding that sometimes when you're playing a game, those veteran teams in a playoff series, sometimes they just outweight the other team. It's a cat and mouse game, and who's going to kind of stick to the program longer, and you wait for that other team to make enough mistakes, and then you've got the skill set to capitalize on those mistakes. And it's a learning process. It's a learning process for all of us. And I'm still learning today, like I said, as a general manager. And again, it's the evolution. When I became manager, I think about 1997. 1997 doesn't seem that long ago. I probably got players on the team that were just born in 1997 or there. So it's 1997 when Detroit won its first Stanley Cup. That was a long time ago. So I've had to evolve as a general manager with the times, with the players. So
I think but Ken, I think like what you're saying there, as far as even you now talking as one of the most respected GMs with long tenure, all these Stanley Cups like sitting behind you right now, and you're saying, hey, I'm still learning. And the new science is saying that's essentially a growth mindset, and that organizations can have a growth mindset. And it starts, I believe, with someone like you, and then it goes down to someone like Dave Tippett and someone like Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl that also all believe that they can get better, and there's an evolution to themselves, right? And when everyone's believing in that, that's when some really special things can happen from my observation, even on a personal level, right? When you continually think that you can improve, you actually want to improve, and you ask those questions, and you're willing to listen to the ideas that might get you better. And would you consider Dave Tippett like to be a good teacher of the game?
I think Dave's a good teacher, and he's a good communicator. He knows the game, and he knows everybody. Jason, everybody, you played the game. not everybody's got the same role in a hockey team. You know, there's offensive situations or defensive situations. Some people play 20 plus minutes up front. Some people play 8 to 10 minutes. Some people on defense play 27 minutes. There's a defenseman that might play 50 minutes. But everybody's got everybody, and then there's the depth. There's injuries. So you know, I think that Dave understands that different people bring different ingredients to the success of the hockey team, and he's able to communicate. He's a teacher. He teaches our team, you know, the style of game that he wants us to play, but he also communicates well with them. He has lots of meetings. He has lots of meetings with the team, but not too. But you can't have too many meetings because you only get them for a certain period of time. You know, and then where all our attention span is, you know, some it's like this and some it's like this. If you go too long, you get tuned out. So you know, he has enough meetings, but not too many meetings. He's got individual meetings. One he gives the players an opportunity to. He's got this leadership group, you know, with people with the letters and 1 or 2 or 3 other veteran players that he meets with. Because they're in tune, obviously, with the locker room, and he wants their perspective from the players as to. But ultimately, as you gather all that information, whether you're a coach, whether you're a manager, whether you're a player, at some point in time, then you got to make decisions based upon that information. But he's a teacher, he's a communicator, and he understands that he's got to make there's parameters whereby the players have got to play inside those parameters. And some parameters are wider, and some parameters are not quite as wide. Again, depending on what's your role and your responsibilities in the hockey club.
Yeah, you mentioned I had Brad Larson on earlier, and he was part of some of those Colorado teams that you guys battled with. I mean, some of the best playoff series of all time, too. I mean, there's more Hall of Famers on the ice. I forget some of the Hall of Famers that were on the ice in those series. But one of the things that Brad said, and I'm sure obviously you realize he's assistant coach now with Columbus and been involved for a while, is he reflected back on those teams, and he just remembered being that fourth, you know, that role player guy that you're talking about. But he said he felt like his job was one of the most important on that team because of the way the Sakicks and the Forsbergs made him feel, and the coaching staff. He said like everyone really believed that they made a difference. And he says that's hard to do, but it sounds like, you know, I mean, that is what Dave is trying to do and what you guys are trying to do there, that every piece is important and to really buy into that fact that you are important.
Totally. I mean, I think that's building a team, Jason. If all of a sudden you have a turnover or a lapse in concentration, somebody on that bench can cost you a hockey game, you know, and it's important. And whether you're out there for 8 to 10 minutes or you're playing 20 to 25 minutes, you know, it's the games are decided, for the most part, the games are decided by a goal. Many games go to overtime, and they're decided in overtime when you get into a playoff series. So, you know, as Brad would say, you know, the fourth liners, they've got an important role, and their job is to, you know, in their 8 and 10 minutes, you're trying to play the game even or win by 1. And it's you know, whether it's the matchup, star players against star players, or one team the coach decides that my checking line is going to play against them. But at the end of the day, you know, that the plus and the minus, but it's also scoring chances. But everybody's got an important role in team success. And I'm going to get back to, again, the team that's left standing at the end of June and is hoisting the Stanley Cup has done it better than anybody else.
Yeah, and I think what Brad was saying there is, like, you know, for a guy like Sakic to come over and sit beside him and say, "Hey man, I love that hit. Like, that was such a big time of the game." And, you know, like how we talked about earlier, like that's not something that everybody does, right? But like for Sakic to do that made Brad feel like, man, like these guys need me, like they appreciate me, you know, and gets all fired up to go out there and do it again the next night. Whereas maybe if that conversation doesn't happen, or if the coach doesn't say it, I mean, of course you're in a professional environment, you're getting paid to do this, you have to be ready. But when you have that little extra, you know, piss and vinegar in your belly, because if one of these older guys is really appreciating what you're doing, it gives you that edge, I guess is what I'm saying. And
I think you would talk. I would come back to leadership and culture, and certainly Colorado would have. I mean, the success that they had. We had played them 5 playoff series, I think, from 1995 to 2002, and they won 3 series, and we won 2. But and I've known Joe since he was, I think, 18 years of age. Joe and my brother Dennis played together on Canada's U18 team, and then I lived in Medicine Hat for the Red Wings and scouted when Joe Sakic played in Swift Current, and watching him play junior hockey was incredible. So, and now knowing Joe as an NHL general manager and how he treats people and his passion, certainly he was one of the people in Colorado. I wasn't in that locker room, but certainly he would be one of the people. Him and Peter Forsberg, and there'd be a few, Patrick Waugh, there'd be 3 or 4 others that would have set the tone from a culture standpoint and from a leadership standpoint. And to your point, that's when you've got your best players, understanding and appreciating that the role, that the contributions that other people on the team are making, whether they're smaller contributions or bigger contributions, but you need all those contributions in order to have team success, really sets the tone for your team.
Definitely. I would like to tie in the AHL, because I was a guy that was in the AHL. I was a guy that was, trying to battle and find my way into the NHL. How does that work in for you as a GM with the teams that you run? Is that a phone call you make down there if you need somebody and you say, hey, I want so and so, or do you say, we need a guy? Who do you think should come up? Like, how does that? Is there a one way that it usually works?
Well, it's a process. I would say to you, I became general manager in Detroit in 1997. And early on I hired, Jim Nill was my assistant general manager. Jim Nill ran the farm team, and then Jim went to Dallas to be the general manager, and I hired Ryan Martin, and Ryan Martin was the general manager of Grand Rapids. And now that I'm in Edmonton, I've hired Keith Gretzky to be the general manager. So that's the person as the manager. I talk to those people. Their job is to go to lots of games down there, work with the coach on an everyday basis. Keith Gretzky and Jay Woodcroft. So Keith Gretzky would have probably seen, half of Bakersfield's games this year. Talked to the coach on an everyday basis, watched them practice, was on the bus with them sometimes. And then there's also a relationship, obviously, Tippett and Woodcroft. They would talk occasionally. And then I went down, I think I saw Bakersfield play 10 times. Little bit different in Edmonton to Bakersfield versus Detroit to Grand Rapids. Lots of it too is geographical. Toronto Maple Leafs, Toronto Marlies. They're 5 minutes apart. So, depending on the geographics of your farm team, how involved, how often does your general manager see your farm team play? But certainly, as you go to training camp, you evaluate all the players, you start to send them down. The season starts, and now you get injuries, and then you, based upon injuries, we need a defenseman. Well, certainly some defensemen, Coach Tippett would have seen some of those players play in preseason games. He's been talking to Jay Woodcroft, and I'll talk to Keith Gretzky. Keith's been talking to Jay Woodcroft, and ultimately Tippett and I will talk, and a decision will be made as to who we call up, why we call them up, and how they're playing down there. Sometimes, and Jason, I played in the minors for 9 years, and you spent some time in the minor leagues. Sometimes we make decisions, call somebody up, and everybody down on their farm team in that locker room is shaking their head. How do they call that guy up and not call up somebody else? And it's sometimes part of it is to bring up a young player to give him. He's a part of your future plan, and you're trying to send a message to him versus a veteran player that maybe, he's more of an American League player, probably on the short term, but or where your team is in the standings and the importance of the game coming up, and the young player doesn't get the call up, and he can't quite understand why he thinks he's a part of your future, and an American League veteran player is getting called up. But we make those decisions, and so, like I said, sometimes people are scratching their heads at the American League level why somebody comes up. But there is a process. There is a process in every organization. There is a plan. There is sort of a chain of command to making decisions. But ultimately, it would probably come down to the NHL general manager and the NHL head coach after communication with the American League coach, with your general manager down there, to making a decision to call somebody. How long is the injury? Is this a game or two, or is this going to be, oh boy, this could be a month? All these things, all this information factors into the decisions that we make that who's going to get called up.
And you're the one that presses the button, though, at the end of the day, after all that information is considered, you're the one that says, yeah.
Basically, Tip and I make a decision. We're going to call somebody, and then what I do is I call Keith Gretzky, and I say, Keith, we're going to call up player X, and then Keith would call, and then you got to get the information out. Once Keith would call the player to say, and Keith would call Jay Woodcroft. Sometimes we went to go through the coach. Maybe it's the first time it's a call up and it's a young player. And between either Keith Gretzky and Jay Woodcroft, one of the two of them would tell the player. Then you got to, then you got to get the information out to, you got a group chat. The trainers need to know if we're going on a road trip, we got to bring that player's jersey or that player's equipment, and we got to, whoever's booking the flights needs to book the flights and book a hotel room and a car service, because lots of people need to know the gymnastics of getting that player from Bakersfield to either Edmonton, or if we're on a road trip to the city that we're in, to make sure that it's totally smooth.
I assume, although you didn't necessarily say it, but it has to be part of the dynamics of that with the call up. I just remember being the guy that was, say the leading goal scorer on the team in the minors, right? And then you get a call up, but it was, maybe Jody Hall was the guy who got hurt, who was playing fourth line right wing. And so then I get called up and I play fourth line right wing, and I'm kind of in a situation where I've never really been in before, or asked to do things that I've never really done. It seems like now, guys are getting called up more for maybe the role that is open there at the time. Is that also a consideration? Like maybe you're getting a PP guy if somebody in the top six is out, or you want a guy who's going to bang if one of your fourth liners is hurt.
100%, I think the hard thing to, again, I played in the American League for 9 years, so I sat in that chair. I was in that locker room, and I saw teammates go up and teammates come back, and some of them were good young players, and they were playing power play, and they'd go up and they'd play 1 or 2 games on the first line, and by the time they were there for a month, the last 10 days they were just a black ace and healthy, and finally they come down, they've lost that swagger and lost that confidence, and you got to build them back up again. So certainly you're 100% correct. We go through, when somebody gets injured, what role does that player play on your team? We got to call up a player that plays that's going to go into that role. So we're not that's where sometimes there's an injury, and someone a fourth line player gets injured, and he's killing penalties and he's playing 8 minutes a game, and somebody at the American League level is leading that team in scoring or leading that team in goals, and can't understand why they're not getting called up. Well, they're going to get called up if a top 9 forward gets injured, and they can play with skilled players. So certainly those are the things that we factor in when we make the decisions about call-ups.
Has that changed in the last 20 years? Like what you just said there, and you said there'd be head scratching in the locker room, and my time in Toronto or, and some of these other teams was definitely like that, where I always thought, why don't they just tell us? Why isn't that communicated? Like even what you just said there, right? Like, hey, Woodcroft goes in and say, hey, we're calling up this guy. He's been doing a great job in the PP or PK. That's what they need up there right now in Edmonton, and nobody else worry. You'll get your chance, or something like that. Like that conversation was never had, and it was kind of like you were just left in the dark and go do your job.
Yeah, I think the communication is much better today than it was 20 years ago. I know it's much better today. I think certainly it's not the coach coming in, but I think that when you make a decision, the coach might use, your American League coach might use that as, he'll go and talk to those 3 or 4 players that he thinks might be disappointed that they weren't the player called up, and to walk them through the thought process. And again, it's still disappointing, even if you walk a player through a thought process, it's still disappointing. So, and at the end of the day, it's hard because, again, I was in the American League for 9 years. Everybody wants to be in the National Hockey League, Jason. You played there. Everybody wants to be, for a whole variety of reasons. It's the best league in the world, and you can make more money, and you're playing in front of full houses, and your games are on TV, and you're playing against the best players in the world, and it's the best league in the world. And when you're, for me as a manager, in training camp, as you got to go through the process, and I got to have one-on-one meetings to tell players if they're cut. It's never easy because, again, I was there, and I reflect back when I was 20 and 21 years old and had those meetings, and you're going to the American League, and how disappointed I was. And these players are way closer and way better than I was, and how disappointed they are. And as you start to work your way through training camp, and you get down to those last 3 or 4 calls, and by a whisker, they've missed out on making the team for whatever reason. And they're tough meetings. They're tough meetings. Those players are incredibly disappointed. They're within a whisker. They're down to the last day. They think that they're going to sneak in and they're going to make the team, and all of a sudden you got to let those people go. And those are tough meetings. They're tough meetings for the players. And as a manager, it's my responsibility to deliver bad news, and you deliver bad news, and then you try to communicate as to why the decision's being made, what they've got to do better. And it's also a good feeling as a manager when you've told somebody, I reflect on Caleb Jones this year, who came to training camp, and there was an opportunity for a young defenseman to make our team, and you get Caleb Jones and Ethan Bear and William Lagos and Bouchard and Samarukov, and they're coming to camp. They're thinking and hoping that they can force their way onto the Edmonton Oilers, and you got to tell them all. I enjoyed the meeting of telling Ethan Bear, you've made the team. Get an apartment, or you're going to be here for 2 weeks, and if you keep going, we'll get you. But you've made the team. You're starting out in the National Hockey League, and then you got to tell those other players that are going to the American Hockey League, here's what we want you to do. And Caleb Jones went about the process of doing what we asked. Go down with a good attitude, play hard, be a leader down there. And we get into December, and his agent and I, Pat Brisson, negotiated a 2-year extension for him, a one-way contract to send him a message that for 2021 and 2022, the Edmonton Oilers management and coaching, we saw that Caleb was going to be a part of our future. And so that's a credit to Caleb digging in, as getting that disappointment, hearing the news, and going down with a good attitude, and picking up and playing good, and playing his way back to the National Hockey League. And his time now is done at the American Hockey League level. He won't be going back to the American Hockey League. So that's all part of the process of a young player. But I would say to you, the communication today is way, way better than it was 20 years ago. Everything's better, and probably will be better 20 years from now than it is today. But certainly the more you can communicate to your young players, I think the better it is.
I think so too. I mean, just how you mentioned there, I mean, there's an honesty involved in it, but just recognizing, for you to be able to recognize that, hey, we know, Jim, Joe, and Larry are going to be pretty upset with this, and just from the person side of it, to take the minute conversation and say, hey man, you still have this to work on. I understand where you're at. It is disappointing. As you said, you've been the player in that scenario too, but at least you feel like you're pulling the rope, right? With the guys with you, right? You feel like, okay, these guys do care about me. They recognize me. They want me to to develop, as opposed to just being, no communication, like that part doesn't exist. Just keep doing what you're doing. So I think those little things make a big difference when it comes to, developing that top to bottom type idea that this is what it takes to be an Edmonton Oiler and this is what we're all about.
Yeah, and Jason, it's a lot of people. It's not one person. It's not just the manager or just the coach. I think it's, we had talked earlier. Certainly, I know that Keith Gretzky, when he spends time down in Bakersfield, he talks to those. There's a fine line. There's a fine line. As a manager, I think it's important for the players to know in Edmonton that their boss is the coach. That's their, and then Dave Tippett's boss is Ken Holland, and my boss is Bob Nicholson and Daryl Cates. There's a chain that and I'm there on an everyday basis, traveling with the team. Then I got to leave the team. I got to go out and scout, and I got to try to spend some time with our scouts, whether it's amateur, pro, or go to the farm team and evaluate players and talk to my people, because you're making decisions, for the trade deadline, for the summertime, to build your team for the following year, for the draft, to build your team for 3 and 4 years out. But for the most part, as a manager, you're with your team, you're with your coach. And there's, so I will have some one-on-ones with the players, but it's got to be one message. I can't be going in there and telling, a player, you got to do this and do that. Meanwhile, the coach is asking him to do something different, because it's not going to work. All it's going to do. So it's got to be that Dave Tippett and I are on exactly the same wavelength, and the message sending that we're giving to our players is, or an individual player is, if we're asking him to do something, we're both asking him to do the same thing. You got to get better on face-offs, or you got to, but I can't be one. Dave's asking him to be better offensively, and I'm asking him to be better defensively, because the player's just going to get confused. And ultimately, the coach is the person that stands behind the bench. He decides the 20-man roster. He decides who's playing with who. He decides who's playing in critical situations. He's deciding who's getting the ice time. So it's important. I find it's important for me to make sure that I've got a real good relationship with the head coach. But the players understand the head coach is making all the decisions about trying to win the game that day.
Yeah, that has to be super clear, right? For sure, because they have to know where the boss is. I totally agree with that. At no level do you want to have that breakdown, though, of like an idea that somebody is inaccessible or inapproachable at all. And I thought that was like really interesting at Detroit too, because it just really seemed like it was definitely I don't know, family is the word that comes to mind, right? It just seemed like from whether you were Nick Lidstrom or Ken Holland or Babs, like everyone just seemed like they had time, like they had time. It wasn't like, go get out of here, right? We have time for each other in this place, and this is what we're about. And I thought that was pretty contagious. We'll cut you off. I've loved having you on, Kenny. I think the last thing I'll ask is, for these young guys going up and say they've been drafted, like, is there a secret sauce? Is there one way that you would say, hey, this is what you can focus on to try and, impress, maybe the wrong word, but to develop or grow and be identified and become an NHLer? Is there one thing that you would say these guys should try and do?
Well, I think, Jason, it's the pursuit of getting better, and understanding what you need to get better at. And that's where the coaches and all, the people that you, what do I need to get better at? And then as you turn pro, everybody wants to be a superstar. Everybody wants to, but the reality is, you think about all the players in the world that are playing hockey, and their dream is to play in the National Hockey League, and 700 players play in the NHL in the season, 700. I'm going to tell you, when I go to those, start out with our development camp in the summertime, and, you're drafted and you're coming into pro hockey. And every year, 200 kids are drafted. 200 kids are drafted, and then there's free agents. And some players play. Nick Lidstrom played 20 years. Steve Yzerman played 20 years, and you've talked about Ovechkin, and there'll be, the stars. Some players can play 15 to 20 years, so it starts to the odds of making it are really, really difficult. And then there's 31 teams, and how many? 7, 8 forwards play on a power play. You got to have a couple of defensemen, so there's 7, 8 forwards per team play on a power play times 31 teams. There's only 200 to 225 players in the world that play on the power play in the National Hockey League, and some of them play on those same power plays for 15 years. So the reality is it's the pursuit of getting better, and then it's the pursuit of understanding where you might fit in the, certainly when you leave Pee Wee and you go into Bantam and you go into midget and then you go into junior, and as you work up your way, the pyramid's starting to go like this, and your role might change. It might change, and very probably will change. And 50 goal scorers in junior might become checkers in the National Hockey League, but those guys are really valuable. If you can check and you can chip in some offense, they're like gold too. So I just think for young players, first off, when you're young, the pursuit of getting better and developing your skills, and then as you start to become 16, 17, 18, 16 to 22, 23, getting physically stronger, more power in your legs, and then as you start to become 20 to 25, understanding where you fit in the professional game and I think about Dan Cleary, who's now the assistant director of player development in Detroit, and he was the 13th pick in the draft. And as a 16-year-old, went to Canada's World Junior Evaluation Camp, and I think he went to 4 World Junior Evaluation Camps: 16, 17, 18, and 19. I think he was cut every time. But certainly Dan's jersey was hanging in the rafters in Belleville. They retired his jersey in Belleville, and at the end of the day, Dan came to the Detroit Red Wings when he was 25 years old. Nobody in hockey would give him a job. And he came to Detroit on a tryout, and he made our team. We signed him to a 1-year deal at $500,000. And I think the first year in Detroit as a 25-year-old, he scored 3 goals in 79 games. But grew into, by the time he was 27, 28, he was scoring 20 goals. He was playing left wing on the second power play. He was playing right wing with skilled players. He was on the ice in the penalty. He became a versatile player that played in a lot of different situations. I don't think that was his vision when he was 15 and 16 years of age, setting all kind of scoring records and leading all kind of amateur leagues in scoring. So he had to evolve, and I guess I use him as an example because I signed him in Detroit, and then we signed him to be Sean Horkov, and he was a guy that had high hopes to be a big time offensive player, and then ended up to be a versatile, useful player that could play in a lot, but not a superstar scorer, but a very valuable player to the Detroit Red Wings. So, and there's lots of those examples, but again, I think it's the pursuit of getting better, the pursuit of knowledge, and then when you're young, you want to be really good. It's a passion. You want to go at the rink and you want to figure out ways to get better. And Leon Draisaitl, I talked to him recently. He loved Pavel Datsyuk as a player. And he says he's got every one of Pavel Datsuk's shifts, that he's ever played, and he watches different shifts and different highlights, and he loved Pavel Datsyuk as a player, and there's lots of examples, but the desire to get better skill, better, compete harder, and then as you go along the path, your path of life, realizing that you might have to make some adjustments to be a different player than you would hope to be.
Yeah, I mean, I call that adaptability is kind of the word I use when I'm talking with the guys that I'm working with, because yes. I mean, it's a value to the organization, but it's also a value to yourself, right? To be able to, like you said, Danny Cleary started in a role that maybe he didn't necessarily think he would have had in Detroit, and then grew into maybe more of a role that he thought that he would have, right? Being a point guy and a goal scorer. And I love what you say there about getting better, because I can relate to that back as a pro, like once I kind of got to pro, and even if I was in the minors, I kind of stopped thinking about how can I improve, right? I was thinking about production all the time, and I was thinking about how many goals, and I wasn't necessarily thinking about, okay, what can I do to get better today? And I think the guys that do keep that close to their heart and continue to develop at whatever age, right, are the guys that stay a long way, because you have to be versatile and you have to grow and figure out your body and where you fit into that team, right? You have to work on different skill sets all the time.
And Jason, that word I would use is, trust. Certainly as a player, the player wants to feel trust from the coach, and trust that he's going to trust him in key situations, and vice versa. The player needs to earn the trust of the coach, that when you are in those certain situations, that the coach believes. Again, it's never 100%. We're gonna have failures along the way. We're gonna deal with adversity, but you use those failures and use that adversity as a tool, as an opportunity for growth, not for failure. So, but that adaptability you're talking about is sometimes it's to go through a shift, and certainly at the pro level, nothing happens. It's to check and you do enough of those. The coach starts to trust that you can handle those situations, and then you get bigger role and bigger responsibilities, and you start to move up the ladder. And very few people go all of a sudden just pop up in the scene and start to play 20 minutes and play on the power play. Those are superstars. Those are the guys that are going on their way to the Hall of Fame. Most players, whether you think about college as a freshman and then a sophomore, and how their role changes from their freshman year to their junior, senior year, if they stay 3 or 4 years. And it's a smaller role as a freshman, and hopefully it's a major role but you've earned that role. You've earned that role by getting better, by improving, by earning the coach's trust. And same thing in junior hockey, when you play from a 16-year-old to a 19 or a 20-year-old, and it's no different when you get to pro. It starts all over again, and all those accomplishments that you've had when you've been an amateur player, whether it's in college hockey or Europe or in Europe, they certainly are a part of your resume. But once you get to pro hockey, nobody cares if you were a 7th round pick or if you were the 5th. Certainly if you were a high pick, the organizations were going to give you more time and more opportunities. But the bottom line is wins and losses, and can players handle the responsibilities that they're from the opportunities that they're given. And it's the trust factor. And you grab a little, you shift after shift after shift after shift after shift. You build up that trust level between the coach trusting you and you trusting that the coach is going to stick with you. And if you have a little failure, it's part of the process.
Oh, I agree. And then those relationships with the coaches I've talked on here before is so important for players, and not to underestimate them because, they're the ones that butter your bread at the end of the day. You have to earn their trust to get on the ice, and they're the ones that are answering the phone calls from guys like you and Keith Gretzky, and, and like, what's he like? And definitely a big piece of the puzzle there. And Scott Nickel, a recent guest, talked about the 700 jobs, and he said it's not necessarily the 700 best players in the world or in the NHL, right? I mean, it's those pieces of the puzzle you're talking about, right?
Yes.
And
yeah.
Where do you fit in, and how do you make it work? So, yeah, I know we covered a lot of great stuff here today. I really appreciate your time, Ken. We'll let you go. I love seeing the Stanley Cups there shining in the background, and hopefully you'll bring one to Edmonton one day and forever immortalized in the hockey world if you haven't been already. So thanks so much. I appreciate it, Ken.
Thanks, Jason.
Once again, thank you so much for joining us here today for episode 17. Not every day we have an opportunity to interview a GM of a National Hockey League franchise. I hope that we were able to cover some things that maybe you haven't heard of before, how they approach the draft, and who makes the decisions, and how they make the decisions, and who gets called up, and who makes the team, and all the things that we discussed today. Ken was really forthright and transparent with what he believes builds culture, and leadership was a big portion of that, and also the relationship aspect of the game was something that he kept touching on, that you have to build trust, that you have to build relationships. This is something that earlier we learned this as players, and as parents involved in the game, the better. That the relationships matter, building trust matters, and being authentic matters. So for all you players out there, take note. There's a lot of good stuff in that interview. And once again, Mr. Holland, Ken, thank you so much for joining us today here at Up My Hockey and really giving us some insight into what it's like to be a general manager in the National Hockey League. So that will be it for today. And as usual, play hard, keep your head up. Over and out.